The first batch of Booker's Bourbon for 2020 is here. It's called Granny's Batch, and it has a sweet story, and for me, another price increase. Let's see how the first Booker's Batch of 2020 is today on the Mash and Drum. During the time of vodka becoming really popular in the 1960s, Booker Noe never strayed from the vision of his grandfather Jim Beam and his beloved bourbon. Now, as others were distracted chasing younger customers, Jim Beam rose to the top with advertisements that actually mocked Russian vodka, as Noe helped popularize small batching, which is a technique used throughout whiskey history but never previously marketed. Instead of dumping hundreds of barrels into one batch, Noe curated and mingled choice barrels. Now, for the whiskey originally called Booker's True Barrel Bourbon, the whiskey came straight from the barrel, uncut and unfiltered. Booker's Bourbon has always been aged in the sweet spot or center of the rack house, where the temperature and humidity combine to create the quintessential Booker's flavor profile. It's then uncut, which means no water is added, and non-chill filtered, which keeps all those delicious oils and congeners in the whiskey for better flavor and better texture. The same can be said for the first batch of Booker's for 2020, Granny's Batch. The first release in the 2020 Booker's Bourbon collection is named after Margaret Beam Noe, who was Booker Noe's mom and Fred Noe's grandma. Granny Noe was the youngest of Jim Beam's children, and although she never worked in the bourbon industry herself, she played a big part in keeping the bourbon family tradition alive from the 5th to the 6th generation. Booker and Granny Noe were very close, and when Granny Noe wasn't keeping track of her kids and the grandkids, she was known to enjoy a bourbon highball in the evenings, playing bridge with her girlfriends and making her famous nutcakes at Christmas time. And that brings us to today's review for Granny's Batch. The first batch of Booker's Bourbon for 2020 is bottled at 126.4 proof, 6 years, 4 months, and 21 days old, and is a blend of barrels from 2 different production dates and aged in 6 different locations within 4 different rickhouses. It's uncut, unfiltered, and for me, had an MSRP of about $85. As with all Booker's batches, they come with a card that tells you the story behind the batch. As you saw in the close-ups, the purple label on the front features an illustration of Granny Noe's famous Christmas nutcake. Now, as a guy who is also very close to his grandma, I could really appreciate the story behind this one. So let's get into the nose and see what we get on this one. So the nose on this is about as quintessential as Booker's gets. This is lots of vanilla and peanut brittle jumping out of the glass so far. There's also this dusty corn note that I'm getting in there, which I really like. I like dusty bourbons, older bourbons, but this has kind of a dusty corn quality to it. There's a lot of smoke and barrel char I'm getting out of here. This is one of the smokier Bookers that I've had in a little while. So yeah, Jim Beam is known for having kind of a peanut forward flavor profile, and this one, there's like a smoked peanut character that's really jumping out of the glass. It's really strong, but I do like that dusty corn aspect of it. You're getting your really good sweet vanilla, your sweet caramels coming out of this glass as well, like you would normally get in a good Booker's. There may be a hint of a dark fruit in there, maybe a cherry or a raspberry, but it's very, very slight. A little bit of a leather note coming through here. Not an old leather, this is more of a fresh leather type scent that I'm getting here. But yeah, really the barrel char, that smoked peanut, and the peanut brittle flavors really dominate the nose here. Let's go into the first sip, see what we get. Here we go, cheers. Whew, this one comes in a little hot, 126.4 proof. But you feel that there's a spiciness to this that's right on the front of the palate. I mean, it is lingering there for a little while. But again, very peanut forward, very smoky I'm getting on the first sip. Let's go for another one. All right, so second sip. Lots of vanilla and caramel on the front of the palate to go along with that spice. Yeah, but then the peanut brittle smoked peanut flavor really takes over the mid palate. Yeah, that barrel char smokiness is still lingering. Same thing I'm getting on the nose. The nose and the palate seem to be matching up well here. Let's go for another sip. Wow, for me on that sip, the spice is lingering. Oh wait, there it is. There's the spice on the back end. I wasn't getting spice on the back end for a little bit, and then all of a sudden it just kind of came out of nowhere after you give it a little bit of time. The front of the palate really gives you some sweet spice. There's a lot of black pepper on the very front of the palate. As it hits mid-palate, you pick up a lot of the caramel, the vanilla, the barrel char, that smokiness. And then as it finishes off with a nice kind of a vanilla icing type aspect to it. And then all of a sudden, here comes more of that black pepper. So the black pepper that was in the front and the very front, all of a sudden appears at the very end. In between, it kind of sandwiches all the sweetness. Let's go for one last sip here. Yeah, the spiciness and the pepperiness now is really kind of rounding out the finish here. A lot of smoke and peanut. This definitely drinks a bit hot, and it's actually sucking the moisture out of my palate a little bit here. It's very drying. That 100, this is one of the Bookers that actually drinks like it's proof. It's really drinking hot a little bit. All right, so I'm gonna add a little water to this, and let's see what some water does. All right, guys, so I added probably about 3 to 4 drops of water to this. I let it sit for about 10 minutes, and let's go back into it and see what we get here. All right, still very peanutty, but now that barrel char and the smoke have kind of dissipated a little bit, the water made it a little bit sweeter, which is kind of nice. Still caramel, vanilla, a little bit of that dustiness, that dusty corn is still there, which I really like. There's still a hint of smoke there, but not like it was without water. All right, let's try this now. Here we go. All right, so with the water, this made it definitely a lot more pleasurable to drink. It's not as proof forward, and it's not drinking as hot. Obviously, you're adding a little bit of water to it, so it's gonna proof it down a little bit, but it made it way more enjoyable, just adding a couple drops. I think now you're getting a little bit of that spice, but it's also drinking a lot easier. Again, it's not bringing out too much more complexity than I'm getting from when I first had it. You're still getting the caramel, the vanilla, a little bit of the smoke aspect there. It's just not as peppery as it was, and it's not drinking as hot. Let's go for one last sip. I think I like it with a little bit more water than straight. I think it drinks easier. It's a little bit more palatable. It's not as hot. It's not as mouth drying. I think it's a solid Booker's batch for the first 2020 release, but I've had better batches. All right, so let's go to the final breakdown on Granny's batch. So here in Ohio, for me, the price is now $85, which is about a $10 to $15 price increase from last year, which really sucks. Back in 2017, Jim Beam announced a price increase from $60 to $99, which was met with a ton of criticism. Beam eventually backtracked and said due to supply constraints, they would move to only 4 batches a year, but still increase the price to about $70 to $75, which was already putting the value of Bookers in a questionable tier. As far as availability goes, availability for Bookers has always been good. It just depends on what batches go where to which state. If you travel around, you could see different batches, some older batches you could find sitting on shelves. I have found multiple old batches just sitting on shelves in different states. But they seem to pop up pretty readily available everywhere you go. Now, value-wise, here in Ohio, I have to go by what I paid. So $85 puts this in a low value tier for me, unfortunately, especially when you compare it to older and cheaper barrel-proof bourbons like Elijah Craig Barrel-Proof, Old Ezra 7-Year, Wild Turkey Rare Breed, and even Bell Mead Cask Strength, which is one of my favorites. Now, I do know some people out there that could still get Bookers for $60 or $65 sometimes, which makes it a much easier buy. But if $85 becomes the next price point across the board, I fear Booker's, Booker's is the bourbon that made me love bourbon. I fear that it may sit on shelves a little bit longer, and that price may only be purchased by hardcore Booker's fans, but time will tell. So finally, is Granny's batch a recommend? For me, unfortunately, this one is not. Coming off of 2019 and how good Country Ham was, this batch, even though it's a solid and good batch of Bookers, it doesn't stand out enough like Country Ham or past batches like Sip a While to warrant pulling the trigger at $85. At this point for me, Jim Beam needs to make every Booker's bourbon release truly unique, more complex, and worthy of that price point with so many great and more affordable options out there. All right, guys, well, I hope you enjoyed this review for the first release of 2020, the Booker's Granny's Batch. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit the subscribe button below. Please hit that like button. If you haven't yet, find me on Instagram and find me on Twitter. Let me know if you've had this yet, if you agree with me. What do you think of the price increase? And as I always say, it's not about the whiskey, it's the people you share with. So cheers, and cheers to grandmas everywhere. Take care, everybody. See you next time on The Mash and Drum.